Nobody believed the number when it first came out. $10 million in gold, recovered in 7 days, from a single mining operation buried deep in the Yukon backcountry. It sounded like a rumor, the kind of story that gets exaggerated 3 times before it reaches the internet. But when the weigh sheets were checked, and checked again, and checked a 3rd time by people who had no reason to lie, the number held. And that wasn't even the strangest part of what happened that week. Because while the crew was still celebrating the biggest haul of their careers, the ground scans, sitting on the site office table, were quietly suggesting something far bigger than any of them had recovered so far. A deposit that early estimates placed near $200 million, sitting beneath ground that everyone thought had already given up its secrets. The man behind both discoveries didn't throw a party. He picked up the phone and called in geologists. Stay with this one, because what happened next split the mining world into 2 camps. The ones who believed the ground was about to make history, and the ones who thought the whole thing would collapse the moment real science got involved. His name is Cole Whitman, and by the time this story starts, he'd already spent more than a decade building a reputation as one of the most aggressive operators working claims in the North. He wasn't flashy about it. He didn't chase headlines. He just kept his equipment running longer than anyone else's, kept pushing crews to dig where other operations had walked away, and kept quietly posting numbers that made competitors nervous. But even by his own standards, the week that made him famous outside the mining world was something else entirely. It started like any other week on site. Coal mornings, diesel fumes, the constant grinding hum of wash plants processing paid dirt around the clock. Nobody on the crew expected it to be the week that changed everything. The gold started coming up heavy almost immediately, not in one dramatic cleanup, but in a steady, relentless climb that kept surprising the crew shift after shift. By the 2nd day, the numbers were already ahead of a normal week's total. By the 4th day, some of the longest-tenured operators on site said they'd never seen a cleanup room fill up that fast. Cole kept the operation running without slowing down, adding an extra shift to keep the wash plants moving day and night. Excavators tore into fresh ground nonstop. Haul trucks never stopped moving, and every single cleanup, without exception, beat the one before it. By the time the 7th day wrapped up and the final weigh-in was tallied, the number came out just under $10 million in gold recovered in a single week. It was, by any reasonable measure, one of the strongest weekly hauls anyone on that crew had ever been part of. Word travels fast in a small industry, and within days, other operators, analysts, and longtime miners were talking about the number. Some were skeptical. A haul that size, in that short a window, made people ask questions. Was the ground unusually rich in one small pocket, or had they stumbled onto something people had missed for years? Cole had his own theory, and it wasn't the one most people expected. Instead of treating the record week as proof they'd found the best ground available and should keep mining it as hard as possible, he treated it as a warning sign that they hadn't understood the ground at all. He gathered his senior crew that same week and told them plainly, if the surface layer was producing gold at this rate, there was no reason to assume it stopped there. Something deeper might be feeding it. That kind of thinking doesn't come from nowhere. Cole had grown up on this exact stretch of ground, first working it as a teenager alongside an older relative who'd mined the same creek decades earlier using nothing but basic equipment and hard-won instinct. Those old operations never had the tools to look deep. Drilling technology was limited, ground-penetrating scanners barely existed for small operators, and going after anything below the shallow pay layer was considered a waste of time and money. So generations of miners worked the surface, took what was easy to reach, and left the deeper ground alone. Not because it was empty, but because nobody could afford to find out. Cole pulled the old records anyway. Faded logs, hand-drawn maps, notes scribbled by miners who'd worked that creek before modern equipment existed. Buried in those old files were repeated mentions of gold traces showing up at depths nobody had bothered to chase. At the time, those notes were dismissed as curiosities. Cole read them as a map nobody had followed yet. It was a theory built on decades-old scraps of paper and a hunch. And turning that hunch into something provable meant spending serious money without any guarantee it would pay off. He brought in heavier drilling rigs, capable of reaching depths the old operation never touched. He hired an outside team of geologists who specialized in reading rock layers most surface miners never dealt with. He ordered ground-penetrating scans across the entire claim, not just the productive sections, because he wanted a full picture of what was underneath before committing to anything. Some people around the industry called it reckless, spending that kind of money chasing a theory built on old paperwork and a strong week of surface gold. Cole's response was simple. If everyone only mines the ground that's already proven easy, nobody ever finds what's underneath it. The exploration program that followed was the largest Cole had ever run. Drill crews worked in rotating shifts, so the rigs never stopped turning. Every few feet of new ground pulled another core sample, carefully logged, bagged, and shipped out for lab analysis. Within the first stretch of drilling, more than 40 separate samples had been collected from different depths and different sections of the claim. At the same time, scanning crews mapped the underground rock structure inch by inch, building a digital picture of what sat beneath the surface long before any of it could be confirmed by a lab. The early signs were hard to ignore. Multiple boreholes, drilled in different parts of the claim, were coming back with gold traces in the same deeper layer. Some of the core samples showed concentrations well above what the crew was pulling from the surface ground that had just produced the record week. It wasn't one lucky hole. It was a pattern repeating across the site. Still, Cole refused to let anyone get ahead of the data. He'd seen operations chase a promising signal too early, sink money into equipment and labor based on hope, and end up with nothing but debt and a played-out hillside. He told his team flatly that nothing would be announced, confirmed, or acted on until the lab results came back and independent experts had reviewed every sample. Then came the sample that changed the tone on site completely. Pulled from one of the deeper boreholes, it didn't need a lab to tell the geologist standing over it that something was different. The gold visible in the rock wasn't scattered or faint. It was concentrated in a way nobody on that crew had seen before on this ground. When the first lab results came back, the grade was well above what anyone had projected, and the pattern didn't stop there. The next hole showed similar results. Then the one after that. Instead of gold concentration dropping off as they drilled deeper, the way it usually does, it kept holding steady or increasing. That's when even the most cautious geologists on the team started talking about this being more than an isolated pocket. It looked like it could be part of a much larger system running underneath the claim. Every sample that mattered went out to independent labs from that point forward, deliberately separated from Cole's own operation to avoid any appearance of bias. Those labs tested for gold purity, examined the mineral composition of the surrounding rock, and worked to understand how a deposit like this could have formed in that location over time. As the reports came back one after another, they kept lining up with each other. It wasn't just promising anymore, it was becoming scientifically consistent. Even with that mounting evidence, Cole held the line on making any public claims. Instead, he expanded the drilling program even further, opening new sections of the claim and speeding up the mapping process. Because if the early data was this strong, he wanted to know exactly how far extended before anyone outside his team heard a number. That number, when the geological modeling team finally combined everything, the scan data, the drill logs, all the core samples, came out to an estimated $200 million in potential gold value sitting beneath the claim. The 3D model built from that data showed a gold-bearing layer that didn't stay confined to one small area. It stretched across a much wider section of the property than anyone initially expected, and it sat deeper than the old records had ever suggested. Everyone involved was careful to frame it exactly as what it was, an early estimate, built on strong data, but still requiring further verification before anyone could call it confirmed. That didn't stop the number from spreading. Once word got out across the mining community, it became the biggest topic of conversation in the region. Veteran operators who'd spent decades working nearby claims weighed in, some cautiously optimistic, pointing out that they'd seen large deposits before, but rarely ones building this much consistent evidence this quickly. Others pushed back, reminding everyone that plenty of promising early estimates in mining history had fallen apart under closer scrutiny, and that nothing should be treated as real until the final verification was complete. That tension, hope against caution, is exactly what kept people talking. Mining forums lit up with debate. Industry analysts started running their own projections based on the leaked data. And quietly, without much fanfare, other companies with claims nearby started pulling their own old geological records back out, wondering if they'd walked away from something similar decades ago. Investors took notice too. A number like $200 million, even framed as an early estimate, has a way of getting attention fast. Several mining companies reportedly reached out to Coal's operation directly, looking to understand more about the methodology behind the discovery and whether similar techniques could be applied to their own claims. Coal stayed cautious through all of it, repeating the same message every time someone pushed him for a definitive answer. Nothing gets confirmed until the science says it's confirmed. Getting to that confirmation meant slowing down, not speeding up. Before any large-scale excavation toward the deeper zone could begin, Coal brought in heavier equipment specifically built for the job. Larger excavators, more powerful drilling rigs, and modern loading equipment suited to reaching depths the operation had never worked before. But he made it clear from day one that none of that machinery would move without scientific sign-off first. A joint team of engineers, geologists, and safety specialists reviewed every new section of ground before excavation began, checking rock stability and structural integrity layer by layer. If a scan ever came back with something unusual, work in that section stopped immediately until the team understood exactly what they were looking at. Coal had seen enough mining history to know that a single careless mistake could destroy a discovery worth this much, both physically and in terms of credibility. Every layer removed during that careful excavation was documented obsessively. Soil, gravel, rock fragments, and gold-bearing material were separated, logged, and tracked by depth and location before being sent for testing. Drone footage and digital mapping recorded the entire process, so nothing about the excavation could later be questioned or disputed. It was slow, methodical work, a sharp contrast to the frantic pace of the record-breaking week that had started this entire chain of events. But Coal treated that shift in pace as necessary. Recovering gold quickly had made headlines. Proving a $200 million claim required something much more rigorous than headlines.